In January of the year 897, the people of Rome gathered for a trial unlike any the world had ever seen. The defendant was not a criminal, not a heretic, not even a living man. The defendant was a corpse. Not just any corpse, either. It was a pope. The papacy in chaos. To understand how Rome reached this point, we need to step back. The late 9th century was one of the most unstable times in papal history. The throne of St. Peter was less a holy office than a political prize. Noble families and factions in Rome schemed endlessly to put their own candidates in power. Popes rose and fell in quick succession. Some reigned for only months. Violence, bribery, and intrigue were constant. In the middle of this chaos stood Pope Formosus. Who was Formosus? Formosus had been pope from 891 until his death in 896. He wasn't a saintly figure beyond reproach. He'd made plenty of enemies during his career. He had shifted allegiances, supported rival kings, and angered powerful families in Rome. Still, when he died, he was buried with the dignity of a pope. It should have ended there. But his successor, Pope Stephen VI, wasn't satisfied with letting Formosus rest in peace. Stephen's grudge, Stephen VI came to power in a Rome dominated by the Spoleto family, one of the most ruthless factions of the era. The Spoletans hated Formosus. During his reign, he had backed their rivals for the throne of the Holy Roman Empire. Stephen, tied to the Spoletans, decided to make an example of his predecessor. The problem? Formosus was already dead. The solution? Put him on trial anyway. The trial of a corpse, and so, in January 897, Stephen ordered the corpse of Formosus exhumed from its grave. Months in the ground, the body was already decomposed. The stench must have been overwhelming. The corpse was dressed in full papal vestments, robes, mitre, even the pallium, and seated upright on a throne inside the Lateran Basilica. To make the spectacle complete, a deacon was appointed to stand beside the corpse and answer the charges on its behalf. Imagine the scene, a court packed with bishops, nobles, and clergy. On the throne, a lifeless body in papal robes, its fingers curled stiff, its skin darkened with rot. Beside it, a terrified deacon speaking for the dead. And in front of it all, Pope Stephen VI, raging at his long-dead predecessor. The charges, the accusations against Formosus were elaborate but petty. He was accused of perjury, lying under oath. He was accused of illegally serving as bishop of multiple sees at the same time. He was accused of ambition, seeking power in ways unfit for a pope. In truth, the charges were political. The Spoletans wanted Formosus' entire papacy declared invalid. That way, every decision he made, every bishop he ordained, every alliance he struck could be erased. The spectacle of the trial was less about justice and more about humiliation. Witnesses testified, but the real purpose was theatrical, to drag Formosus' reputation through the mud while his corpse sat rotting before the court. Accounts from the time describe Pope Stephen screaming at the body, pointing, demanding answers. The deacon, trembling, responded in Formosus' place, but everyone knew the trial was a grotesque farce. The assembled clergy and people of Rome watched in horror and disbelief. This was not justice. This was desecration. The outcome, but in the court of Pope Stephen VI, the verdict was inevitable. Formosus was declared guilty, and the sentence was as bizarre as the trial itself. Stephen ordered that the corpse be stripped of its papal robes. The 3 fingers of the right hand, the ones used for blessings, were cut off. Finally, the body was declared unworthy of Christian burial. It was dragged through the streets of Rome, stripped and mutilated, before being thrown into the Tiber River. The Cadaver Synod, as it became known, was complete. Closing of Section 1. So by the beginning of 897, Rome had witnessed the unthinkable. A pope putting a long-dead predecessor on trial, screaming at a corpse dressed in papal robes, and sentencing the body to mutilation and desecration. It was supposed to destroy Formosus' legacy. Instead, it destroyed Stephen's. In Section 2, we'll see how the grotesque trial backfired, how the people of Rome rose up in outrage, and how Stephen himself met a grisly end, strangled in prison by the same mob he had enraged. Because in history, sometimes the darkest farces consume not their victims, but their authors. The Cadaver Synod was supposed to settle scores. Pope Stephen VI wanted to erase his predecessor's legacy, please the powerful Spolitan family, and show Rome who really controlled the papacy. Instead, it triggered one of the biggest backfires in church history. Because the sight of a dead pope on trial didn't just shock Rome, it enraged it. The people's outrage at first, the trial had been attended by bishops and nobles, but word spread quickly. Ordinary Romans began whispering that Stephen had gone too far. Yes, papal politics were brutal. Yes, popes came and went in bloody cycles. But exhuming a corpse, mutilating it, and tossing it into the Tiber, that crossed the line. For many, it wasn't just grotesque, it was sacrilege. Formosus might have been controversial in life, but in death he was still a consecrated pope. To desecrate his body was to desecrate the papacy itself. The body in the river Stephen's enemies fanned the outrage. Rumors spread that when Formosus' body was thrown into the Tiber, miracles occurred. Some said the corpse washed ashore and was found by monks, who reburied it secretly. Others claimed the dead pope's body floated back to the surface and began working wonders. Whether true or not, the people of Rome began to see Formosus not as a disgraced heretic, but as a martyr, a victim of Stephen's madness. The backlash by mid-897, Rome erupted. Angry crowds rose against Stephen VI. A mob stormed the Lateran palace, captured the pope, and threw him into prison. Within weeks, Stephen was strangled to death by his jailers. The man who put a corpse on trial ended up executed like a common criminal. The Cadaver Synod had destroyed its architect, not its victim. The rehabilitation of Formosus after Stephen's death, the church scrambled to repair the damage. Formosus' body was recovered from the Tiber and reburied with honor in St. Peter's Basilica. His reputation, once tarnished, was restored. Later popes annulled the Cadaver Synod, declaring it invalid. The idea of putting a corpse on trial was quietly buried, literally and figuratively. But the story couldn't be erased. Everyone remembered. The cycle continues, of course. This was the 9th century papacy. Chaos never stayed buried for long. Within a few years, Rome would see more violence, more papal intrigue, and even more bizarre episodes. But nothing ever matched the grotesque theater of the Cadaver Synod. It remained the ultimate symbol of how far papal politics could sink, a courtroom drama starring a corpse. The legacy historians still debate what drove Stephen VI to such extremes. Was it pure hatred of Formosus? Pressure from the Spolitan family? Or a sign of his own instability? Whatever the cause, the legacy is clear. The Cadaver Synod became shorthand for the madness of medieval politics, a moment when the authority of the papacy was dragged, quite literally, through the mud. Today, it is remembered as one of the darkest, strangest, and most humiliating trials in history. Closing of Section 2, so here's the final tally. Pope Formosus died in 896, buried with dignity. Pope Stephen VI dug him up, dressed him in robes, and screamed at his corpse in court. The verdict, guilty. The punishment, mutilation and the river. The backlash, riots, Stephen to rest, and his own strangulation in prison. The Cadaver Synod was meant to erase a dead pope. Instead, it erased a living one. And it left behind one of history's most grotesque reminders that sometimes power doesn't just corrupt the living. Sometimes it drags the dead into the courtroom, too.